It's a pleasure to be back here again. I feel like I was just here. It's a lot of fun coming back to Cadence. So today we are going to talk about some anti-aging or healthy aging strategies. And this is a great opportunity for us to put together a lot of the principles. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. So many of you that have come to some of my prior talks, we're really going to help take a lot of these principles and tie them together in an effective way to really prevent some of the most common things that we see with natural aging processes, a lot of the chronic health conditions that we see. For those of you familiar with my talks in the past, I like to teach you the science behind things first, because that's the way I am. If somebody tells me to do something, whether it's exercise or eat a specific food, I need to buy into the concept that this is actually worth my time and my effort and my investment to actually do that. So I dig pretty deep into all the things that we talk about. So my background information you got already. A lot of information that I'll bring up today in the talk, because science, nutrition, and exercise science changes so rapidly, often I will include specific links to my blog on topics like omega-3s, because I want that to stay up to date. Sometimes my slides may get outdated over the years, so at least you can reference back to my blog posts, which I do keep very updated on the latest science. Okay, so let's go ahead and start talking about some of the chronic underlying metabolic and physiological processes that can cause premature aging and age-related disorders. Because once you understand those, the lifestyle ages will make a lot of sense. So the first one is this condition we call inflammation. There's a lot of different words to describe what the root cause for this is. There's a condition called leaky gut. We often use it synonymously with autoimmunity. But at a high level, all I want you to understand is in the top row, any outside external factors, so we can call it micronutrient deficiencies from eating a nutrient-deficient diet. Maybe it's environmental factors, toxins, air pollution. In the middle, I've got physical stress or emotional stress, basically. Any of these factors can enter our body and then disrupt that pink wall right there. And that pink wall is actually the lining of your intestinal tract. What a lot of people don't realize is that most of our immune system sits in our digestive tract. And this system was developed to episodically respond to outside external stressors. So once in a while you have an infection, you get a cut or a wound, your immune system activates to help you heal and repair. But when we say somebody is in a state of chronic inflammation, that alarm system is turned on low grade constantly. And that's what can lead to everything from cancer, diabetes, and heart disease to Alzheimer's disease. And it could be any multiple factors together that can come and disrupt that lining, and then that can trigger inflammation or by causing our immune system to backfire. So that's one concept I want you to understand at a high level, is this process called inflammation. Now, there's a term that we often throw out there in the world of aging and longevity. It's called inflammaging, because it really gives you an idea in a sense that when we're in that chronic inflammatory state, it can accelerate everything in our body in terms of the aging process. You can see all the different categories there. We talked about some of these: diabetes, atherosclerotic disease, cognitive decline, memory loss, arthritis, you name it, it's linked in some way to inflammaging or inflammation. Okay. So now I also want you guys to understand some of the terminology. I'm going to warn you ahead of time, there's going to be a pop quiz, okay? So be ready, no falling asleep during this talk. So these are some key hormones and proteins I'm going to reference as we talk about lifestyle changes. The first is insulin. Okay, so insulin is responsible for proper glucose and nutrient transport, and we'll talk about that because it's such a critical hormone that controls a lot of our metabolic processes. And when insulin goes awry, a lot of things can fall apart. The second is cortisol, which is popularly known as our stress hormone, responsible for the fight or flight response. When that goes haywire, it can also accelerate the aging process and increase the risk of chronic health conditions. The third is growth hormone, helps us retain lean body mass and burn body fat. It does a host of other things that we'll summarize. This one, BDNF, stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Simple way to think of it is I call it brain fertilizer, basically, because it helps keep our nerves and connections very strong, helps us retain our cognitive function. And the last one is melatonin, which helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle. So I'll dig a little bit deeper into each of these, and then the lifestyle changes we'll talk about will be all centered on how we can optimize these hormones, because this is essentially what we're trying to accomplish. So insulin, the way we want insulin to work is when we consume carbohydrates, like the car in the middle of the diagram, we'd like insulin to push carbohydrates towards our muscles so our muscle can burn that for energy. But when we say insulin's not working properly or our bodies become resistant to insulin, what that means is our muscle parking lot is not responding to the insulin signal. And so then what happens is the carbohydrates can go in various directions. It can go towards fat storage, especially belly fat storage. It can go to the liver where it gets deposited as fatty liver. The liver, when it becomes overwhelmed with carbohydrates and sugar, can start producing cholesterol like triglycerides. Or what happens is over time, the carbohydrates just stay in the bloodstream and your glucose goes up. So that's insulin resistance. So we typically think of insulin resistance as being connected primarily to type 2 diabetes. But now we're finding that it's connected to a lot of other chronic health conditions. It's intimately connected to Alzheimer's disease. So now it's so strongly connected to Alzheimer's that we often refer to Alzheimer's disease as being type 3 diabetes. And we're seeing an epidemic of Alzheimer's in many countries that are known for type 2 diabetes, like India and Asia as well. And what basically happens is when your body is insulin resistant, your body overproduces too much insulin. And one of the things excess insulin does in the body is it actually causes plaque to accumulate inside the brain. So this third bullet point shows that people that have insulin resistance, which might be prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, the hippocampus, a structure in your brain that helps you store memories, it shrinks in size. So literally, too many carbs, too much sugar in the body leading to insulin resistance will cause that central memory process in your brain to actually shrink in size. And this stat is just alarming. Diabetics are 50% more likely to develop Alzheimer's than non-diabetics. Alzheimer's is complex. There's genetic factors, there's environmental factors, but out of the reversible risk factors, insulin resistance is probably one of the most important ones you want to keep track of. So make sure when you're getting your lab tests done, how's your glucose control? How are your triglycerides? I've given several talks here before on insulin resistance. My blog has tons of talks on this, but know that there's a direct brain connection between insulin resistance and Alzheimer's. The other thing, too, is when we become insulin resistant and there's too much circulating blood sugar, there's a strong connection with insulin resistance in cancer. So cancer, like humans, likes to eat sugar. Cancer cells actually, when there's abundant sugar in the body, cancer cells feed off that sugar and it makes them grow and metastasize. So keep in mind that glucose, excess carbohydrates in the diet that outstrips our physical activity levels can increase insulin and also a chemical called IGF-1, which stands for insulin growth factor 1. I blogged in detail about the connection between cancer and insulin resistance. In my clinic, I'm starting to see a lot of first-generation cancer. So people that have come to my office, no family history of breast cancer, no cancers in anyone, and they're coming in with first-generation breast cancer, lung cancer, etc. And when I track back to their ancestry, I find that the only difference is that they might have, they're being raised here in an American modern lifestyle where they're much more physically inactive, eating different foods than their ancestors did. So they probably had inherited some tendency towards cancer, but the diet and their modern lifestyles is what actually pushed them over the edge. So insulin resistance, cancer is complex, but again, we're finding a connection like with Alzheimer's to insulin resistance. Now, the impact of cortisol. So we talked about cortisol being the stress hormone. I showed this at my prior talk here on emotional metabolism, but basically what I tell people is when you've got that chronic stress in that cortisol layer, it just makes all the insulin-resistant problems worse. Cortisol alone causes increased fat storage, especially around the belly, and belly fat itself will accelerate and make insulin resistance worse. Cortisol also causes the liver to produce extra amounts of sugar. So I typically tell patients, because I see a lot of diabetics in my clinic, many of them are on the keto diet, they're exercising like crazy, but their morning fasting blood sugars continue to be high. And the number one reason is because they go to bed activated, they're digitally stimulated, they're on laptops and devices, they go to bed very late. That sends a stress signal, cortisol, to the liver saying this person's under attack during the most vulnerable period of time of day, which is nighttime. So I'm going to make the liver pour out tons of sugar. And the liver is so efficient in making sugar that even if you ate no carbs before bedtime, it will turn your dietary protein into sugar, or it will feed into your muscles. It will break the protein down and turn that into sugar. So that's why chronic stress is a major, major issue, stress and sleep deprivation in terms of triggering sugar release. And then finally, chronic cortisol can also have an impact on muscles, because if you're really having a lot of stress, you can't retain muscles, you can't recover from workouts properly. So all of these things that we talked about before are made much worse when cortisol is in the picture on a chronic basis. What about the impact of chronic cortisol on the brain? So amyloid and tau proteins, these are the substances that cause those Alzheimer's-related plaques to develop. It causes all that sort of damage inside the brain. And we've seen without a doubt that chronic cortisol can actually trigger the increased production of those substances to accumulate in the brain. Cortisol also accelerates overall cognitive decline from all other types of neurodegenerative disorders. And I tell people, even without having a disease, think of what stress does to you, like in a really highly stressful situation. Think about if you're taking a test or giving a speech. If you're really stressed out, you forget very simple facts. And the reason for that is because in the short term, cortisol diverts blood flow away from the hippocampus, our memory processor, into our muscles because it's designed to make us fight or flee. So on a regular basis, when you have chronic cortisol release, you can have impaired cognitive function and memory. And many of my patients that come to see me, they're 20, they're 30, they're like, I used to remember everything and I'm forgetting stuff like crazy. They're afraid they have Alzheimer's. And I remind them that until we mediate that cortisol, until we improve sleep, their memory will not be restored. Now, the scary thing is in the past I used to say this is reversible, and it is reversible in the early stages, but if you have any tendency towards Alzheimer's, that chronic cortisol can cause earlier onset Alzheimer's, or it can unmask Alzheimer's at a much more aggressive state. So just keep that in mind, that cortisol can have those impacts on a lot of different body parts, but the brain is something I'm very fixated on. Cortisol's impact is pretty devastating on the brain. And then just genetic aging in general. So that structure down there that you're looking at, those are our chromosomes. And the tips of those chromosomes in red, those are called telomeres. So think of those as being the plastic caps on your shoelaces. The health of those plastic caps determines how fast your genes age, how fast you age. So what we find is when people smoke, when they're eating the wrong types of foods, those plastic caps that protect your genes, they start to wither away. And the incredible thing that we've seen over the last 10 years is that emotional stress and cortisol can damage those chromosomes. So one of the studies they've done that is one of the most compelling out there is they basically took a group of moms that are taking care of kids with chronic disorders, chronic health disorders, which is, a segment of the population that can really relate to the most intensive levels of stress. And they compared those moms to a group of moms that have normal parental stress, healthy kids, but just going through normal, maternal duties and activities. And when they compared their age-matched chromosomes, they found that the chronically stressed moms, their chromosomes were literally 10 years older. So a 35-year-old mom had the genes of a 45-year-old. And they've reproduced this in other chronically stressed populations as well, that literally it will age you. And that's why, I used to in the old days show a slide. This is during the Clinton presidency. And I showed a picture of Clinton before Monica and after Monica. You often see like presidents within just a couple of years, they literally look so different. And what's happening is their telomeres are aging quite a bit. You might know this amongst your friends and colleagues. If somebody's gone through a major job situation, an illness in the family, they literally look like they've aged, and that's because they have aged. Their telomeres have actually worn out. And when those genes are affected, the cells in every part of your body are affected. You can see wrinkled skin, you can see graying of the hair, you can see arthritis settle in. All these things can acutely happen from that chronic stress exposure. I'm hoping this talk isn't causing your telomeres to wither. We have some hope for you at the end, so I know I'm giving you a lot of news here. So growth hormone I kind of touched upon. It is one of the ultimate anti-aging hormones. So we talked about increasing muscle mass and increased fat burning. Growth hormone has an incredibly stimulating effect on the brain as well too. So when we're making proper growth hormone, our neurons, our brain cells can fire better, quicker, you can remember more. With our exercise, it increases aerobic capacity and endurance, increases bone density. It actually improves our immune system function, keeps our skin nice and elastic, so less wrinkles as well. So that's why, all the pharmaceutical markets are looking for, something that we can use as a retail growth hormone type substitute for anti-aging. But right now, we want to focus on how can we get our own body to produce its maximal amounts of growth hormone. And then finally, BDNF, I called it the ultimate brain fertilizer. Just to dig in a little bit deeper, it helps our brain cells survive longer, increases the longevity of our brain cells. It actually leads to new blood vessel growth. So our brain cells work best when they've got an adequate blood supply. And literally this brain fertilizer creates new blood vessels to help nourish those brain cells. And finally, it also leads to the production of more blood cells in general in our system, which not only nourishes the brain, but nourishes our muscles and body so we can, remember more. We can also exercise longer. So BDNF is really an incredible substance. And now there's so many great lifestyle studies to show what are the specific things that can cause us to increase BDNF levels in our body. Okay, and then melatonin was the other one I mentioned. So melatonin, you might know already, melatonin is a very popular supplement, but our own brain creates melatonin, and it's really exquisite how our brain creates melatonin. Basically, you've got the brain structure right there on your right. There's a gland called the pineal gland, and that's where melatonin is produced. And the way we produce melatonin is basically during the daytime. We don't want melatonin in our blood system because we want to be awake and alert. So the sunlight streams through our eyes, and it blocks the pineal gland from producing melatonin. So right now, during daytime hours, melatonin levels go down. At nighttime, when the sun goes down, that darkness will actually stimulate melatonin release at nighttime. So this is a beautiful system, really connects us to our waking cycles. Melatonin, keep in mind, also improves our body's insulin sensitivity. That's a good thing. That means when you eat carbohydrates, if you've got adequate melatonin in your body in the evenings, it's going to help bring the blood sugar down more effectively. Melatonin also helps clear those two proteins that I mentioned, the amyloid and the tau protein, which accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. So we're going to talk about day-night cycles, but I'm just giving you the science because, otherwise it sounds silly for me to tell you to go to bed earlier, shut off the devices, but you need to understand that these sorts of habits can have a tremendous impact on how your brain operates on a daily basis. And then, the health risks of suppressing melatonin chronically, such as in night shift workers, has become so profound that the World Health Organization's subsidiary on cancer has called night shift work a possible or a probable human carcinogen. So cancer, especially breast cancer, is connected to chronic suppression of melatonin or extensive night shift work, diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. So this is acknowledged as a major, major issue. Okay, so now it's time for a pop quiz. So I'll just have people call out the answers. So first thing is, which protein is referred to as our brain fertilizer? Very good. Your BDNF is working very well. Excellent. Good. Which hormone helps with functions such as muscle growth, fat burning, and endurance? You got it. Beautiful. Which hormone helps transport glucose cars into muscle cells? Man, straight A's so far. Which hormone is referred to as our stress hormone? Excellent. And then which hormone regulates our circadian clock and whose release is inhibited by daylight? Beautiful. Excellent. Great. You guys are paying attention. So now let's move on to the lifestyle changes. And we're going to start off with a very popular topic now. Instead of me focusing first on what to eat, I want to talk a little bit about the timing of eating. Because in many of my patients that see me in the clinic, I kind of beat my head against a wall often because I can't get people to eat healthier. So sometimes I just step back and I think, you know what? You're eating a lot of garbage. Maybe we can fix the timing of when you're eating the garbage. And believe me, that's a good first start. If we can get people to compress when they're eating garbage, that's better than them just eating garbage continuously. So let's talk about timing first. So there's two practices you might be aware of. One is abbreviated IF for intermittent fasting. The second is time-restricted eating, or TRE. So IF, or intermittent fasting, it literally focuses on the number of hours that you can go without food. And typically it involves a minimum duration of about 12 hours without food. That's a minimum we need to really give the liver and our metabolic hormones a break so we can get some benefit from that. Now, time-restricted eating is sort of a form of IF, but it focuses more on the eating window. So if I told you I'm giving you an 8-hour eating window, so that means you're going to eat all your calories between 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., so basically that's what? That's an 8-hour eating window. Then you're actually on the back end doing a 16-hour fast. So when they say do a 16-8 fast, you're fasting for 16 hours, but you're eating all your calories within that compressed eating window. A lot of people ask me, how frequently can I eat? Usually when you're eating, you just eat within that window. Nobody really keeps track of should you eat every 2 to 3 hours. You just sort of eat in a rational way throughout that eating window. So that's how we think about IF and TRE. Now, what are the benefits so far that we've seen? And most of this, we don't have enough long-term human data, but some of the data that we're looking at in animals is quite compelling. We definitely see anti-inflammatory effects. So now that you know what inflammation is, it looks like IF and TRE does lower inflammatory markers in the blood. It absolutely improves the function of insulin. It makes you less insulin resistant. It interestingly improves circadian rhythm and melatonin. So many of my patients that are able to eat like this, their sleep quality actually improves. It is actually a booster of growth hormone. We talked about the multiple anti-aging properties of growth hormone, so IF and TRE can help that. Again, in animals, we're seeing early studies that it can increase longevity. Now, I did put here that in some cases it can increase cortisol. So one thing I would tell you is many times I do see patients that come to see me in the clinic and they're already very malnourished. They have autoimmune conditions like thyroid. They have a lot of stuff going on. And on top of that, they're trying to do extensive fasting. That can be an adverse stressor to the body. Cortisol, as much as we've made cortisol to be sort of an enemy hormone, cortisol in episodic bursts is very adaptive for the body. That's why doing high-intensity exercise every now and then, doing things that stimulate cortisol is a good thing. But if you're already under a chronic high cortisol state and now you're doing extensive fasting on top of that, that's very different, right? So I did a lot of writing on sort of the harms and benefits, of fasting. And generally, fasting is a good thing. But sometimes in my type A, Silicon Valley, stressed out, sleep-deprived folks, the fasting is one other thing that's making things worse. And cortisol levels and inflammation can actually backfire. So some people, I tell them, we need to work up to fasting. First, let's improve the nature, the nutrient density of your diet. Let's work on sleep and stress. And then maybe we'll start extending that fasting window a little bit. So I just want to put that disclaimer in because otherwise you'll read news headlines and people are like, okay, I'm going to skip meals for 16 hours. And that can often backfire if you're already in a baseline high inflammatory state. So if you are ready to do some forms of fasting, the word fasting seems very sort of, ominous. Maybe breakfast skipping for some might work well. Or try to end the eating by 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. at the latest. A later eating, so this is one of the key things I tell people, is aside from just counting the hours that you're eating and not eating, you do want to do everything possible to finish that evening meal as early as you can. When we see meals extend beyond 7 or 7:30 p.m., I tell people the metabolic hormones in your body are kind of like a shop that's open during daytime hours. When the daytime's gone, what happens is when you eat those same foods later at night, you can't process them. So for example, insulin doesn't work as effectively. That means the same carbs you eat at 3 p.m., they're going to cause a much higher spike in your blood sugar at 8 or 9 p.m. And I have a lot of patients that are eating their dinners at 9, 10, or 11 p.m., and I fall off the chair just thinking about that because their hormones can't process that. They spend the entire night, and basically because your metabolism isn't active, you're storing that rice, whatever you're having, into your belly fat cells, into your liver, into your cells that can't process it. So it's really important that whatever plan you pick, try to make that eating window end as early in the evening as possible. I know it's not always going to happen, but really try to make that effort. You can consume non-caloric beverages like coffee, herbal tea, sparkling water during your fasting period. But like I said, I do have some preconditions about fasting. You can check out my 5 top myths about fasting to learn more about that. One of the other key side effects I do see I want to call out right now, many of my patients doing fasting, when they do eat, so we call that the refeeding period, they're not eating very nutrient-dense meals. So let's say you fasted all day and then you go home and you just have rice, flatbreads, and some lentils, okay? There's no adequate nutrients. There's hardly any adequate protein. You're just going to be in a chronic starvation phase, and you're going to have vitamin D deficiency, B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, and those in the long term are going to put you at a higher risk of disease. So if you are going to end that fast, make sure you're eating a very holistic, nutrient-dense meal. We'll talk about what some of those options are. So again, time-restricted eating. So we talked about the eating window, and really it's more tolerable if you can work up. If you can start with 12 hours and you feel well and you feel energized and you can do that, then you can talk about maybe compressing your window even more and then going up to maybe 14 or 16 hours. But if you're having trouble with intermittent fasting, just start with a longer eating window first and gradually work your way down. That's the way you want to sort of work into this. Some of my patients just go a little bit too crazy with the fasting windows. They get very hungry and end up overeating a lot. I did put the study here, which to me was very compelling, which showed that a 13-hour fast reduced breast cancer recurrence by 40% and death from breast cancer by 20%. So that was really compelling. That came out in the Journal of in JAMA Oncology. So it really shows that fasting can be used as a strategy to really prevent recurrence of cancer. It can slow down tumor growth as well, too. So there's a lot of exciting science behind that. There are studies now looking at combining standard chemotherapy and cancer therapeutics with fasting, and looks like synergistically they can work together very well. So there's a lot of exciting things around this on the horizon. Okay, so when we talk about nutrition, now let's get into, we talked about the timing of eating. Now, what should we be eating during those refeeding periods? In general, just to keep it simplistic, we want to make sure we're getting enough fibrous vegetables on the left side. That's going to be half your plate. And then you want some combination of protein, some starchy carbohydrates, and some healthy fats there in the middle. And how I basically dial this up and down, if you had a day where you're very physically active, your muscles did a lot of work, you can dial up your carbohydrate corner there, okay? If it's a day where you're sitting all day and you're not getting much work, that's a day where your muscles don't have much of a demand for energy. So if you're overeating the carbohydrates, it's going to go, remember my traffic diagram, towards fat storage or liver fat production or triglyceride production. So I'm exceptionally low carb on days where I'm more inactive. Protein intake, we shouldn't overdo protein intake, but we'll talk about protein towards the end. A lot of my patients are under-eating protein because of the nature of their diet, if they're vegetarian, for example, or they're doing so much fasting that their body's not getting adequate opportunity to get adequate protein. So we'll talk about that towards the end. And then don't forget about the healthy fats because they can have a lot of great impacts. I added herbs and spices here because they have potent anti-inflammatory effects, and those are anti-aging effects. So really add some color and flavor to your foods by adding these other condiments because they are really medicinal in their value. And a lot of leading anti-aging scientists are looking at these herbs, especially turmeric, because of its incredible value with lowering inflammation and even improving insulin resistance. Okay, so some broad anti-aging nutrition principles. First, we've talked about insulin already, so we want to keep the sugar and extra carbs restrained and compatible with our physical activity levels. Those of us that are eating at irregular times and eating irregular macro and micronutrients, your glucose levels are going up and down. So one thing is when your glucose fluctuates a lot, it's a big stressor to the body. Those glucose swings can actually increase cortisol levels. We want to keep your glucose as stable as we can, and that's why adding adequate protein and healthy fats can keep that glucose level more stable so cortisol doesn't go up and down. Eating multicolored plants lowers inflammation and optimizes your digestive health, which cools down inflammation. Healthy fat we want to make sure we're getting enough of, and protein we'll cover towards the end. So those of you that have come to my prior talks, I'm a huge fan of cruciferous vegetables. So sometimes I know it's overwhelming. You go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and you're trying to pick out what produce I should buy. Every week when you get your groceries, cruciferous vegetables has to be in your cart, at least one or two different types, because cruciferous is one of the most anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer agents you're going to find. I always get a question about, what about my thyroid? Forget about your thyroid because you have to take in so much raw cruciferous vegetable to have a negative impact on your thyroid. You have to be juicing pounds of cruciferous vegetables. But cruciferous vegetables in moderation will actually lower inflammation and can be good for your thyroid. So, really make sure you're using these. There's a whole variety of them out there. Some weeks, if you're lazy like me, just get a bag of Trader Joe's Cruciferous Crunch. It's already gotten 3 or 4 different types of cruciferous vegetables in there. I literally throw that into a hot pan with some olive oil or maybe avocado oil or coconut oil. I'll add turmeric, black pepper, and that's like a 5-minute side dish, and it's unbelievably healing and anti-inflammatory. So we really have no excuse for not getting these sorts of vegetables into our diet. Now, when you hear about eating more colors, this is something I find. So when I do a high-level dietary intake, I find that a lot of people have just they're eating the same 2 or 3 colors or maybe 4 colors every week. Greens are so easy, right? You just get those bags of everyone's eating enough greens. You guys are eating enough kale and spinach and greens because they come in those pre-washed bags. Then you might have a banana here and an apple. But we have to add a lot more diversity. I find one of the colors that's lacking the most in my patients' diets is purple. And purple is unbelievable. It's loaded with antioxidants called anthocyanins. It lowers inflammation. It is great for cardiovascular health. So at least make a commitment to get more purple in your diet. And you can get them through fruits and vegetables. So I get purple carrots, purple potatoes. I'll mix it up. But you do want to add more diversity on the color spectrum. Find where your color gaps are. And every week, challenge yourself by trying a new vegetable. Try a different root vegetable, a different color, not the same thing. I mean, I love having regiment in my life. And before I knew all this, I would probably buy the same 3 or 4 fruits and vegetables every single week. If I could eat like that, I would prefer that. But I find that if you want to optimize health, you've really got to diversify as much as possible. Now, some additional nutrient-dense power foods that I've listed, if your diet allows it, small amounts of organ meats are unbelievable. You can get so many micronutrients and healthy fats out of that. Shellfish are fantastic for getting all these essential micronutrients that you're not going to get from a standard diet. Sardines I'm a big fan of. I've got cans of sardines stacked in my office. So sometimes I'm on the run. I grab a Trader Joe's salad or whatever. I throw my own sardines in there. I don't use a Trader Joe's dressing because I keep olive oil in my fridge. So if you go to my blog, I have a YouTube video on what I stock in my office. And often I'm doing office lunch makeovers where I'll take whatever was at the meeting, I bring it back to my office, and I scrap the dressing and I put my own olive oil, salt, pepper. I've got turmeric in my office. So check out that video. It'll tell you how you can do kind of lunch makeovers in your office if you're not finding the right stuff. But I've checked out your cafeteria. I've eaten here. You guys got a lot of good stuff here, so no complaints. If you saw my office, you'd be kind of shocked because there's really no food there at all. So sardines, herbs and spices, bone broth, egg yolks. Yolks are incredibly nutrient dense. And then sprouts, especially broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts are amazing in terms of the health value you can get from that cruciferous vegetable. Now, the healthy fats, keep that in mind. We want to make sure that we're getting adequate healthy fats. Extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil fall into our monounsaturated fat oil spectrum. And those oils really, I feel like, are often underutilized because they can help lower blood pressure, lower inflammation, and have positive impacts on cholesterol. I actually, many of my patients with high blood pressure, I make sure they're getting 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day because studies show that olive oil taken naturally can actually have a blood pressure lowering effect. Nuts also are loaded with monounsaturated fats, seeds as well, avocados. So for me, again, a typical, going back to my lunch makeovers, sometimes I'll get that pre-made salad if I didn't make it at home, and I've got a couple of bags or containers of nuts in my office. I've got seeds in my office, and often I bring avocados with me to work or I keep them in a fridge. So you can do this sort of makeover for any of your meals. Omega-3s. So omega-3s can come from fish or plant-based sources. If your diet is open to either one, I just want to remind you that fish-based omega-3s have the most studies documenting benefit for inflammation and heart disease as well. So if you have the option, you want to emphasize both, but you want to make sure you are getting the fish-based omega-3s. I know I have fish oil capsules up there. Fish oil capsules have become a little bit controversial. There are specific indications for those, but we don't widespread recommend them like they used to. This is why you should read up on my omega-3 post. I go into a lot of depth about what types of omega-3s are good for you, how you should basically approach supplements. But in general, getting omega-3s from natural plant-based foods can really lower inflammation, and it's very brain healthy. Many of my patients with memory issues, when they increase their omega-3s, they start to see those things improve. It can also help with depression and other mild mood disorders. Okay, so we talked a lot about stress in the beginning, the impact of cortisol, especially on brain function. I've done dedicated seminars here on stress, but let's go over a couple of high-level points about stress. So one of the key things that I focus a lot of my talks on when I give stress workshops is to identify something called rumination. And rumination really is the process where we constantly fixate on negative content, and that looks like it's a major precursor to common stress-related disorders or emotional disorders like anxiety and depression. So I kind of term these pre-anxiety or pre-depression. When we tend to ruminate more on past events, that predisposes us to depression. If we ruminate or worry a lot on future events, that's more anxiety. And for a lot of people, it's a mixture of both. Interestingly, studies have shown that eating probiotic-rich foods or taking probiotic supplements can actually reduce ruminating thoughts, which is really fascinating, but it makes sense because those ruminating thoughts have been shown to actually change the composition of bacteria in our intestines. And when you change that bacterial composition, that can actually increase inflammation because typically negative thoughts in our head cause the wrong bacteria to grow, and it suppresses the healthy bacteria. And this is very different than daydreaming. I had to put this up here because I was giving a family seminar on rumination and mental health, and I had a young mom kind of reach out and talk to me. She's like, I'm a little concerned because my son daydreams about Star Wars all the time. And then I had to tell her that that's not rumination. Like, daydreaming is very healthy for mental health, and it's great if you're brainstorming, you're daydreaming about things that are involving imagination. But if you're constantly fixating on really negative content, prior conflicts, work, personal type stuff, then that's where it can really feed forward or back into anxiety or depression. So again, I did a very dedicated post on more about rumination and what things you can do. But really one of the basis of this is, remember, I told you rumination is our tendency to dwell on past or future events. So really the way you therapeutically address that is how do you find things that can really ground you more in mindfulness. So mindfulness practices like meditation, gratitude practices like reframing. How do you take a situation and reframe it into a positive? Finding hobbies that can distract you away from the future and past into the present. So many of my patients are, I call them elliptical ruminators. They're on the elliptical, the treadmill, and they're still ruminating about negative content. And that's better than being sedentary ruminators. But sometimes we need a sport or activity to really get our mind off things that we can focus on. So keep that in mind. But rumination is really something we all need to be aware of. And when I do a lot of teen workshops, I'm finding that a lot of teenagers during high school, that's a time when they really learn to ruminate because they've disconnected from their parents, they're spending more time alone from their families, and they haven't quite connected at school, or school has become a very superficial environment. People are social networking, a lot of social comparison. So a lot of intensive rumination happens during those high school years. So you as parents, as you have kids in those ages, you need to find ways that they can connect with you or other people so they can kind of express those emotions. Really key. Now, the breathing is another key part of it. So that was rumination therapy. We need to teach ourselves to breathe adequately into our diaphragm. So I've shown this diagram before, but basically you want to make sure you have a way of comfortably breathing into that abdominal area. When we can breathe in through our nose and inflate our belly, we activate the vagus nerve, which activates our relaxation system. So many of my patients with chronic stress and cortisol issues, when they come into the office, they often think they're having asthma or some sort of breathing disorder. But the main issue is they've been breathing up in their chest their whole lives, literally. They don't know how to send a breath into their belly. So often I tell them, when you're at the computer and you feel really chronically stressed, pay attention to your breathing. Is your belly moving at all? And if it's not, that means we're not activating that diaphragm. So really doing diaphragmatic breathing practices can really help mitigate the impact of that stress on your body. And that's my high-level point about stress, is we can't eliminate our external stress, but we want it to have the least metabolic implications on your life. So if you're facing a conflict or some situation, you want to have the lowest surges in cortisol. You want the lowest elevations in sugar and blood pressure. And the way you can mitigate those impacts from happening is by practicing these sorts of practices. Mindfulness therapy, diaphragmatic breathing can help bulletproof you against the impacts of chronic cortisol release. And then any sort of practices that combine movement and breathing, these are fantastic. As I've gotten older, I'm doing less boot camp and high intensity and more yoga and meditation. But the beauty of this is I'm doing more of these movements. When I do decide to go for a run or play basketball with the kids, I've got a lot more energy reserves. I'm not constantly tired from overworking out all the time. So keep in mind that it is really important to have some of these movement practices in place. And I put a bunch of mindfulness resources. Our medical group, PAMP, has some incredible mindfulness classes all over their foundation. So if you go to that site, they've got programs for adults and teens. I've often sent teenagers to take these mindfulness classes. It's a great option. If you're more tech-focused, I put a list of some of my favorite apps for mindfulness: Headspace, Calm, Buddhify. Waking Up is the one I'm getting the most feedback on lately. It's a very popular app. It's got like over 10,000 five-star reviews. But Sam Harris is a brilliant meditation teacher. He's really helped popularize meditation and make it more appetizing for people that were prior skeptics. So these are some great resources to look at. And I also, because I'm such a big believer in breath training tools, I've got a couple of apps up here. I teach people how to use the Apple Watch properly. The Breathe app is actually an incredible way for you to really regulate your breathing and bring down your heart rate and blood pressure. If you go to my link here, I've got short YouTube videos on how I use these apps. And this is something really, even if you've got kids and they really are not buying into this, I actually had my kids using this pranayama app from age 9 or 10, and they've really learned the benefits of breathing just by using some of these tools. So you can check out that site for some demos if you need some help with that. So now moving on to exercise and activity. This is one of my favorite studies because this study just blew me away. But what they literally did was they did a study where they took the genes of 25 healthy older men and women, and they compared it to 26 healthy younger men and women. And they found about 600 genes that were related to mitochondrial health, related to aging. So our mitochondria is really what produces energy in the body. And the incredible thing they did was they actually had older subjects undergo 6 months of strength training. And they found that in addition to increasing strength, when they look back at their genes, a lot of the genes that were turned off, the younger genes, they reverted back to a younger profile. So 6 months of strength training literally was like the fountain of youth. So this kind of blew me out of the water because it really, we know this probably intuitively, but this was genetic evidence that literally resistance training specifically can be a fountain of youth for people that are aging. Really incredible stuff. So avoid muscle wasting. Sarcopenia is the name for this condition. So as we age, we lose a certain percentage of muscle, and that accelerates as we get older. And we don't just lose total muscle mass. There's a specific type of muscle fiber we lose called type 2 muscle fibers. So when you compare type 1 to type 2 muscle fibers, the difference is type 1, or what we call slow twitch, long-distance muscle fibers. So that's why we've got an endurance runner there on the left. So those are the fibers that allow us to go at a low speed for longer durations. The type 2 or type 2B are the jumpers and the sprinters. Anybody here Warriors fans? I mean, I think basically Draymond Green, one of the most unbelievable type 2 guys, because the way he jumps and sprints down the court relentlessly for 4 quarters, a lot of people, it's genetic. They are born with a high density of type 2 fibers, and that might dictate why they go into Olympic track and field versus doing marathons. But the key thing I want you to be aware of is as we age, we not only lose more total muscle mass, but we're losing more of the precious type 2 muscle fibers. And if you're not resistance training, you're going to lose more of that. And this is key because I'm not expecting that age 55 or 60, although you can, I'm not expecting you to be doing jumping and lunges and athletic sports like that. But at the very lower level, what I'm telling you is when a senior falls, it's because they have no type 2 fibers. If I were to walk up here right now and there was some unstable footing and I sort of lost my footing, my type 2 fibers would kick in immediately to rebalance me. So a lot of the falls and hip fractures happen in seniors because when they lose their footing, they can't correct with their type 2 fibers because their type 2s have disappeared. Because as people get to a certain age, they don't squat, they don't jump, they don't lunge, they don't do these types of activities. So I'm not saying you have to do it at a high level, but definitely doing some of these deeper resistance training type exercises can help protect you against falls and preserve aging as well too. Strengthening legs in particular. So if we're going to get specific, this is another study that kind of blew me away, is where they looked at over 300 healthy female twins and followed them over 10 years. They looked at multiple health and lifestyle parameters, and the reason we often in science like to do twin studies is because you can compare two individuals who have the exact same genetic material. I have identical twin boys, so I can relate to this. So basically, they've got the same genetic material. You compare their lifestyle to see what led to the most improved memory and health, the thinking, learning, and memory. So they looked at diet, nutrition, and everything. And the fascinating thing was out of all of these lifestyle parameters, leg power was the strongest predictor of cognition and reduced age-related brain changes. So that's why I say leg power equals brain power. And if you think of the way our parents and grandparents age, and I see the effects of this throughout the lifespan, is what happens first. They're walking independently, no problem. All of a sudden, walking speed slows down. All of a sudden, walking becomes more unstable. All of a sudden, they're using a cane, and all of a sudden, they're more bedbound, right? It's all happening because of sarcopenia, specifically leg power becoming reduced. Now, the problem with sarcopenia, and I forgot to call this out in the prior slide, is it's happening earlier. What's happening to my 20, 30-year-old engineers? There's kids that are just sitting all day. Now they're developing premature sarcopenia. So by the time they hit age 40 or 50, they're going to have even less muscle reserve. Brain power and memory are going to go down at an accelerated rate. So this is what we're worried about in our healthcare system, is we're aging in a sedentary environment. How the heck are we going to take care of the future hip fractures are going to happen? I mean, our sedentary employees probably have no type 2 fibers right now. So really keep that in mind. We got to make sure we preserve these areas of strength. And then for those of you, again, that are app-focused, often in the old days, I would do this in my clinic, as I would actually test my patients to see how many squats they can do. And this is one of my favorite tools, the Runtastic Squats app. So you can use this for apps, for push-ups, squats, and even pull-ups. And literally use the phone for push-ups. You put it on the ground. You do push-ups over the phone. We'll keep track of it. Many of my patients share their data. They show me, okay, when I saw you first, Dr. Sin, I could only do 10 squats. I'm doing 50, 70, or 100. So it puts you on a program. And for the squat app, you basically put the phone in your pocket, you're doing the squats, and it basically measures how many you're doing. But if you need something to keep you motivated, maybe personal training, maybe using an app like this, but make it a regular part of your lifestyle, and really integrate this into your day. I mean, you can work at the computer for a little bit, you do a couple of squats, you work a little bit more, you do a couple of lunges, maybe you do some plank. Try to integrate it into your workday as much as you can to preserve those muscles. And also remember that single leg exercises are really important. So many of us might just do leg exercises where we push on a machine or we're doing supported squats, but keep in mind that we want to maintain our balance. So doing single leg lunges, or if you're doing yoga, yoga's got so many great single leg exercise poses like tree, warrior, eagle. It's amazing once you can get these down, you're just better in all sports and you just feel much more stable. So these are some key ways you can really strengthen balance, work on strength and balance together. So let me get past this. So just to summarize, a balanced exercise plan to me, on a daily level, we want to get our step levels above 8,000. We want to interrupt prolonged sitting. Those are important priorities. I focus a little bit more on strength because I feel like that's lacking. You want to work on flexibility and mobility daily to improve recovery and lower inflammation. Heavy lifting, if we can do some of that 1 to 2 times a week. Cardio 2 to 3 times a week. I put not mandatory. The reason I put that is if you're getting enough vigorous walking and you're doing heavy lifting, that can contribute to cardio already. It'd be good if you can layer some cardio onto that, but often if we're doing adequate physical activity and lifting, we can get adequate cardio from that. We do want to prioritize rest and sleep when you're tired so you can recover. And then I tell people, don't be overly regimented. Like if you've got boot camp scheduled 3 days a week, if you wake up, you're tired, you're sore, you may want to postpone that and do yoga and some sort of recovery. As we age, as you guys know, we get sore more often, right? So for me, it's when I was younger, I had different goals for exercising. I want to be faster, stronger, I want to look better. Now my goal at age 48 is I don't want to be in pain, right? So some days I wake up, I'm like, if I go for a run today, I'm going to be in more pain. I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to foam roll, I'm going to walk, I'm going to stretch and hike. So whatever works for you. Now, coming back to protein, I know I gave you a protein teaser here because as I assess people's protein intake, a lot of my patients are consuming way too little protein. They might be doing a lot of heavy lifting and exercising, but their protein intake is deficient. So what I recommend is, as we age, we do want to combine strength training and increase protein. The other problem I see sometimes is people read about protein, they're like, I'm going to eat more protein, but they're not exercising. And as we get older, if you're just adding more protein to the diet and not lifting properly, you're just going to gain more fat. It's just more calories. So we want to combine both of these to retain that muscle. And on the other contraries, if you're lifting a lot without the protein, you're not going to be able to hold on to adequate muscle mass. So keep in mind that the general standard for protein intake set by the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. It's much too low. Every health expert I've talked to, every scientist I've talked to has said that recommendation is far too low. We actually want to aim more for 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So that would put most people at about 80 to 100 grams daily for most people. And I see in my office, people are often eating 30, 40 grams. My vegetarians especially. Again, I'm not anti-vegetarian in any way. I encourage vegetarianism in a lot of my patients, but many of them who are not keeping track of protein, I cannot imagine being sedentary and eating less than 50 grams of protein, your muscles are going to disappear. They're already disappearing slowly. So you got to make sure you're getting enough of that. So an easy way to think about protein, because some people eat their protein in an imbalanced fashion. Breakfast is mostly carb, maybe lunch they'll get a little bit, and then dinner they sit down and have a heavy serving of protein. It's better to distribute your protein more evenly throughout the day. So think of it as being 25 to 30 gram protein doses per meal and distribute that during your eating window if you're doing time-restricted eating, but keep it more even. Many of my patients that are overeating in the afternoon and evening is because they had no protein early in the day. So if you're getting serious hunger pains at 3 or 4, you come home and you're like ravenous and clearing out the pantry with your mouth, you have to think about, do we need to eat more protein the first half of the day? That can help stabilize your blood sugar. It can prevent you from getting really fatigued after lunch, and it can really prevent a lot of that other hunger. Because protein's so key to me, I've done some dedicated posts, the power of protein. My vegetarians always complain there's not enough protein sources. There's plenty of vegetarian protein sources, so check out that blog post, and I'll walk you through all the different ways you can get protein on a vegetarian diet. Now back to brain fertilizer. How do we get more brain fertilizer in the system? So there are specific types of exercises that can really help boost BDNF. Sprinting in high intensity, even short bouts. Tabata is one technique for interval training, but sprinting in high intensity a couple times a week, great way to increase BDNF. Sometimes I'll go out with the dog to the local park and I'll just run, I'll sprint with the dog. I mean, anything you can get, and not only is that good for BDNF, sprinting, remember, actually activates the type 2 fibers that I talked about that are so important. Even if you did 1 or 2 sprints and then you followed that by light jogging or walking, that would be great. Resistance training, especially using large muscle groups, again, you're building the type 2 fibers that we talked about, plus you're boosting BDNF. There are some studies that show that exercises that you enjoy and that you can do socially, that's a mood enhancer and a BDNF enhancer. And the more challenging exercises that we can do that involve some agility and skill, those look like that they have an intimate impact on increased BDNF. And exercising outdoors is interesting because vitamin D looks like it has a synergistic effect in increasing BDNF. So you're outside, playing basketball with your kids, doing something outdoors, you're getting multiple inputs to BDNF, lowering stress levels, improving the type 2 fibers together, right? We want to kind of synergize a lot of what I'm saying into one. We don't have time to do each strategy separately. How do we combine all this together with our busy lives? Now, the hormonal benefits of walking and interrupting sitting, just to summarize real quickly, is it does lower cortisol. Okay, so instead of doing intense workouts every day, walking is a wonderful way that you can still burn sugar, lower insulin, and keep cortisol levels low. You can still burn fat if you're walking at a pace where you're breathing just a little bit heavy. So that means at lunch, if you're walking here on the campus, if you're walking just at a pace where you're breathing a little bit heavy, you are burning some of that body fat. So keep in mind that don't, forget walking and really interrupt that sitting whenever you can. This is the Tabata app. So I mentioned Tabata for BDNF boosting. fit in 4 minutes. So the Tabata interval is basically 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of break. One set is 4 minutes. There's multiple Tabata apps out there, but I love doing this. And actually, even in senior studies have shown that you don't have to go crazy. Even if you walk fast, walk slow, walk fast, walk slow, you can get some of the milder effects and impacts of high-intensity interval training. So I'm going to visit my mom this weekend. It's her birthday. Whenever we go for a walk, we walk for 10 minutes, and then we do gentle intervals while we walk around the neighborhood. I've taught her to kind of walk fast, walk slow. It'll keep her type 2s engaged. So for those of you that have aging parents, really, it's important. Now, with my mom, I'm like her personal trainer in a lot of ways, but I teach her, I make sure she's going to have protein in her diet. And I also have taught her how to do assisted squats. So even at her kitchen island counter, she'll touch both sides, and she just does gentle squats. And now she's kind of worked up to being able to do more. But it's really key that for aging parents, grandparents, they learn these techniques because it'll help preserve their brain function, their physical function moving forward in life. And now let's finish off real quickly with sleep and aging. So the key thing with sleep is we want to make sure we're getting enough quantity and quality of sleep, especially the deep phase sleep, what we call stage 3 and 4, because that's where a lot of the beneficial metabolic effects occur. So the hormonal effects of inadequate sleep, unfortunately, is when we don't get enough sleep, is we develop more insulin resistance. Our hunger hormone goes up, our fullness hormone goes down, we crave more junk food. Growth hormone drops like crazy when we don't sleep well. And we talked about the anti-aging benefits of growth hormone, and then cortisol levels can go up as well too. So sleep has a profound impact on multiple hormonal inputs here. Now, with the increased daytime sun exposure, reducing the evening light exposure, this is all having to do with melatonin. We want to make sure we're regulating melatonin properly. I'll talk about some key tips on how to do this. But just the key things is when you wake up in the morning, try to get at least 25 to 30 minutes of outdoor sun exposure, ideally. Even if you get to work a little bit earlier, you're checking your messages, can we do it outdoors? You know, so whatever you can do, because that's going to help ground your circadian rhythm. You getting morning exposure of sunlight will help you produce more melatonin later in the evening. So that's really key. I mentioned that we see a lot of vitamin D deficiency, and to me that's a sign that we're not getting adequate sun exposure, because that's where you get most of your vitamin D. The other side of this is, besides getting adequate morning sunlight exposure, we have to make sure we're limiting evening bedtime blue light exposure. And where is that coming from? That's coming from sources like, sorry, I don't have this here. It's coming from sources like laptops, phones, digital screens. If you absolutely have to do any work, you can use amber-colored goggles or software to filter out some of the blue light. But if you have the choice, I'd want you to avoid digital stimulation at least 90 minutes before bedtime. This will also help reduce brain activation. But if you have to do it, there are some strategies. If you've got iOS devices, you can use the Night Shift app. If you know tonight that you've got deadlines and you have to do work late at night, those are days where you want to make sure you're getting enough daytime sunlight exposure. So if I know that Friday I've got deadlines, I'm going to be working late Thursday night, I make sure Thursday morning I get at least an hour of sunlight in the morning, because that can help bulletproof you against some of the blue light effects at nighttime. Okay, so restoring circadian rhythm, morning sunlight, and some physical activity upon waking, that can help with your circadian rhythm and melatonin exposure. If you can even get some sunlight exposure around lunchtime, that can help you. And then you do want to limit blue exposure at nighttime as well. I know we're running out of time here, but one quick thing I also want to mention is when people tell me about the hours of sleep is important, but what time you go to bed is critically important. So this graph that I'm showing you right here, we already talked about the unbelievable effects of growth hormone. Look at the curve on growth hormone. Most of the growth hormone we release is spiked between 10 p.m. to 1 or 2 a.m. So if you're sleeping from midnight to 5 or 6 a.m., you ain't getting much growth hormone at all. You know, so I don't care what 8 hours you're getting or 7 hours, it's got to occur at the right time. It's got to occur at the right interval after sundown if you want to get the growth hormone and the other hormones that can help lower your blood sugar. So this is important for you, for your kids. Earlier to bed, earlier to rise is a better pattern for anti-aging hormonal release. Okay? When you are getting sleep, so this is why I think sleep is so critical. Everything we talked about today, sleep has been shown to reduce inflammation. Sleep, especially deep sleep, it boosts growth hormone. It reduces insulin resistance and prevents diabetes. REM sleep, which is dream phase sleep, inhibits cortisol, okay, our stress hormone. Limiting blue light increases melatonin, and impaired sleep reduces BDNF, our brain fertilizer. So sleep impacts all of these avenues. And based on that, my opinion, and now a lot of health and wellness experts have said that the quality and quantity of sleep is turning out to be the single most effective and comprehensive anti-aging disease prevention strategy. But unfortunately here we find that this is the one we push aside. Let me work out harder, let me diet more, let me fast longer, but I'm still going to bed at midnight, right? So really, I've had to reprioritize my life after looking at the science, but sleep is a critical component of all of this. Okay, so I just summarized all the key tips that we talked about here for better sleep. My resources are here, so I blog on a lot of these topics. I've got a whole family wellness program that I'm teaching a lot of kids and families a lot of these principles using video animations. You can learn more about that there. And with that, we will go on to questions. All right, shall we? Yes.
Thank you so much. Let me bring the microphone, and then we have many questions online if you don't mind staying to answer some of those. So keep your questions as brief as possible, and then we'll alternate.
Do you have any recommendation for any particular brand or type of probiotics to supplement with?
Good question. So brands and types of probiotics. So probiotics science has gotten very refined now. And I would say, first of all, some high-level principles. So basically, you do want to get a probiotic that most likely is refrigerated because that's where it's preserved. You want a probiotic that's going to be absorbable and not going to be denatured by stomach acid. So you want to make sure it's got those properties. Now, I'll give you at a high level some brand names. Things like VSL3, Culturelle tend to be standard ones. There's a new one that's getting all this press out in Silicon Valley because literally it's called Seed, and it's seed capital invested by venture capital firms. And it's actually backed by very high level science. So you might want to look up Seed, S-E-E-D. And the beauty of this particular probiotic is it's a mixture of prebiotic and probiotic. And prebiotic is something that will help feed the healthy gut bacteria. So those are some principles you can look for. Yeah. Other questions? Either
Question online.
Yeah.
What is the fact and myth about catching up on sleep on the weekends?
Okay, so the key thing is, so with napping and catch-up sleep, listen, if you had an exhausting week, you're going to make that exhaustion worse by exhausting yourself on the weekend. So I'm fine with catch-up sleep, but do not kid yourself into thinking that catch-up sleep and naps is equivalent to the sleep that you're going to get during the nighttime. They're physiologically completely different. So yes, it can prevent exhaustion, but unfortunately, a lot of people think that I'll just work my butt off during the week and get exhausted and I'll take 3-hour naps on the weekend to recover. But you're losing that physiological sleep, right? The 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. or that extended sleep and the REM sleep. So yes, catch-up sleep is a necessity, but it's an emergency precaution. Don't make it habitual, because then you're just going to perpetuate, shortchanging sleep so you can catch up on the weekends. Yes?
Yeah, I have 2 quick questions. 2 10-year kids, and a question about this fasting part.
Yeah.
Would you recommend for them as well to finish their food by 6, 7 and not eat until later?
Okay, so for children, or for teenagers, the questions about teenagers and fasting. So in general, what I want to tell you is I don't recommend necessarily fasting practices for kids in the sense that extended periods of time without food. Teenagers are growing, so they need calories to grow. I think I'm a fan of early dinners and early bedtime for all teenagers. That's not skipping a meal necessarily. But if they were to have an earlier dinner and their breakfast is 12, 13 hours later, that's not a problem. But I'd get away from probably skipping meals or making sure, that they are getting their adequate nutrients.
A quick question about the bedtime. My 11th grader, he insists that the doctors indicate that the teenagers have a different circadian rhythm, that they can't sleep before 1 a.m. or something.
He's a smart teenager. Yeah. They know how to find those selective studies. He also probably found that video games are good for your brain, right? So yeah. No. But actually, he's right. Teenagers at a certain stage of development, their sleep cycle does shift. So they get pretty wired around 10 or 11 p.m. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer here. Like, my kids are freshmen in high school, both my boys. And the thing is, many kids are stimulated because they're doing stimulatory things. They're on digital media, and they're very activated. And they'll use that little Google Science article as their support for why they need to go to bed. But it is true that even if you take away that digital activation, some kids, they just cannot fall asleep till 11 or so. And I think the challenge now is, unless your school has an early start time, that could be pretty tiring for a kid to go to bed that late and then get up at 6 for school. But if they're truly getting, wired at that time despite not being activated by other means, he's right. There are those developmental changes that happen. So, yes, in the back.
Question online. How much do genetics factor into the aging process?
Oh, so absolutely. So genetics definitely does play a role with aging, just like it does for chronic conditions. And obviously there's no way. So I know the title of this talk, meaning anti-aging, is we can't stop that process. But what you can do is if you have a genetic tendency towards Alzheimer's or chronic, diabetes or heart disease, the thing that you can do is through lifestyle changes, you can basically slow down the onset of those processes. And for conditions like Alzheimer's and diabetes, you can eliminate those genes from getting turned on altogether. So genes does play a role, but your lifestyle can really significantly overpower that and delay that. And that's what aging is. Aging is like all of us are going to die from something. Most likely it's going to be heart disease, and #1 cause of death in men and women. But what we want to do is we want to delay the onset of those conditions as far down the road as possible. So it's not happening at age 50 or 60. It'll happen at 85 or 90, and we can just be out like a light, right? That's sort of what we want. But that's what you want to do with lifestyle changes, is to push that genetic tendency out as far as possible. Microphone, I think, yeah, go ahead.
For people that have a memory problem, is there a medicine? And did you see anyone that took those medicine that his memory get improved?
No. So unfortunately, for memory, I have not seen a single supplement or medication that's been. I wish there was. If there was, believe me, I'd be probably taking myself. But the problem is there really isn't. And even unfortunately with the condition of Alzheimer's disease, of all the drug trials done on the multiple medications out there, despite all the pharma drugs sort of saying that they're great, when you look at meaningful criteria based on patient and family measures, none of them are worth anything in salt. What I would ask you to do is, if we're talking about Alzheimer's-related memory loss, go to my blog and put that in, because there are lifestyle strategies that have been proven to actually reverse early Alzheimer's disease. And a lot of it is based on what we talked about, interval training, fasting. These practices can be powerful in slowing it down. But until now, no, modern science doesn't have a good memory pill yet.
Do you have any precautions for hair loss due to stress or aging?
So hair loss is very complex and tricky, and I got to say it's not my area of specialty, but often what we see with aging, so this is one of those situations that can in some ways be genetically predetermined. We do know that chronic stress has an impact on that as well too. Acute traumatic stress can cause your hair cycling to completely shift, so you're not replenishing the hair loss that's happening. So I would actually look at all of these lifestyle factors, but in addition to that, I would look at other hormonal factors which your physician or dermatologist can check. What is your thyroid function? If there is an indication for checking testosterone or other stress-related hormones, looking at micronutrients like B vitamins, you might have to take more of a holistic approach, because there's multiple things that can lead to hair loss. Oh, sorry, you got a mic, or just give up, right? Or just accept it for what it is, right? So.
Good presentation, Dr. Ron.
Thank you.
My wife is a vegan, and we're raising a 7-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And the challenge, I get into an argument with her all the time, is she doesn't want to drink milk. What do you suggest?
So vegan who doesn't want to drink milk. So with vegans, we have a lot of challenges because it comes down to a lot of proteins and micronutrients. So what I would recommend, again, just to make it a little bit simpler, on my vegetarian post, I do have some options that we can look at for protein. I wouldn't say that milk is an absolute necessity, but obviously with vegans, that is one of their sole major protein sources. But you can still get a lot of other plant-based proteins. The other thing with vegans I'd say is you have to really look hard at vitamin supplementation. It's very difficult to get. You're not going to get B12 vitamins, and low B12 vitamins over time can lead to growth issues and development issues. So make sure you're getting an adequate multivitamin. Talk to the pediatrician about that. But there are non-milk or non-whey alternatives to getting protein from other sources, through plant sources.
Thank you.
Sure.
From online, what are your thoughts on MCT oil?
So MCT oil is medium chain triglycerides. It's very popular through the keto diet. So you naturally get it through coconut, but there's a lot of MCT oil supplements out there. So what I would tell you is if you're on a keto style diet and you're really trying to go sort of the low carb way, MCT oil sometimes can improve fat metabolism. It can provide some energy. I think small amounts of it is fine. My disclaimer is I have some patients that are using a lot of MCT oil, and especially if you're saturated fat sensitive, it can raise cholesterol. So I would say in terms of oils and fats, maybe a small dose with your bulletproof coffee in the morning might be okay, but your fundamental anti-aging fats should still be the monounsaturated fats like olive oil, avocado oil, natural sources of omega-3s. Don't make MCT oil your sole oil source.
So these days there are lots of talks about alternative cancer treatments.
Yeah.
Given that lifestyle changes and nutrition can basically lower your risk of getting cancer, do you think lifestyle changes and good nutrition can actually reverse cancer or slow down the growth of cancer tumors in patients who already have cancer?
So the studies, so what I would say is right now, based on the most common cancers that are out there, lifestyle changes can have a significant impact on progression. In many cases, we can see, I shouldn't say many, but definitely there are reported cases where you can stop progression. Reversal, I haven't seen as much. You know, with the keto diet now, they're looking at keto for cancer, and it looks like for some aggressive cancers, keto diets can be a really powerful intervention because you're literally starving cancer cells of their favorite fuel source, which is sugar. I'm going to give you a couple of resources. Actually, the best resource is there's a book called Anti-Cancer, which you might have come across. It's written by physician David. He's got a hyphenated name, which I can't recall. But this is probably the most comprehensive resource for nutrition-specific cancer strategies. I'm not going to overcall and say that, yes, we're there yet. But I think the real wave is the newer generation of when we look at chemotherapeutics in conjunction with lifestyle. I think the problem right now with the standard approach to cancer is it's all radiation and chemotherapy based, and it's not integrated into a holistic nutrition strategy. I think more of the newer centers are trying to combine both of those. But yeah, I think nutrition plays a key role, but we're not at the point where we'd say it's a definite cure or reversal for a lot of cancers yet. Yep.
From online, most cultures say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. How do you reconcile this with intermittent fasting?
Okay, and there was a study that just came out that was all over the headlines. It said people that skip breakfast die sooner and have more heart. Did you guys come across that? It was all over the news. So this is literally what drives me nuts. So here's the issue. It all depends on what your metabolic situation is, what we're trying to accomplish. So when you look at studies that say that skipping breakfast leads to more obesity and heart disease, those studies were done in mass populations of patients that are just skipping breakfast. And before all this fasting craze came up, the types of people that are skipping breakfast usually have other issues going on too. They're skipping breakfast because they're chronically stressed, they're on their way to work, they're probably overeating later in the day. You can skip breakfast in a very unhealthy way and end up overeating later on, and that's going to lead to more diabetes and heart disease. If you're skipping breakfast in a specific effort, a deliberate effort to do fasting to burn body fat, and you're eating really healthy foods on the back end, and you're doing a lot of things that we talked about, fasting can be really powerful. So it really depends. My patients that come in that have diabetes or prediabetes, they check their morning blood sugars, and they're often high. And I'm like, why are you eating oatmeal right now when your morning blood sugar is 150? Your liver already delivered a bowl of oatmeal into your bloodstream at 3 in the morning. There's no need for you to add another second bowl to that. So you've got to really personalize that strategy. Breakfast can be someone's worst enemy. For other people, it's fine. And other people, it's sort of intermittent. Throughout the week, you sort of determine what it is. So really, I would say in most people, depending on your situation, having a healthy breakfast isn't going to hurt most people. But just keep in mind that if you got insulin and other issues, sometimes pushing breakfast out and doing time-restricted eating can be a very powerful way to combat that. Microphone.
On one of your slides, you mentioned extra virgin olive oil. Is there a reason for extra virgin rather than just olive oil?
Yeah, the extra virgin is more pure. It's got more vitamin E and more antioxidant load to it. So I'd say regular virgin olive oil is okay, but extra virgin really has more antioxidant substance. So you're really getting more medicinal benefit from that type of oil. But the key thing is there's a lot of adulterated extra virgin olive oils out there, so you want to make sure you're getting the right brands. And out of the brands out there, believe it or not, when I've looked at a good scientific resource for what is the olive oil that has the highest percent of antioxidants, it was a Costco Kirkland brand. I was surprised. Compared to all these expensive high-end olive oils, that one had it. The only challenge with the olive oil from Costco is it comes in a very big container. It's made out of plastic. So if you want the olive oil to stay really intact, it should be a closed glass container that's not exposed to light. So you might have to go through the hassle of kind of transferring some of that in there, because if it's sitting out in a bright light in a plastic bottle, by the time you get through a fourth of it, a lot of it's going to be denatured. So, but yeah, by weight, that's a good one. The Chosen Foods brand's another good one as well too.
From online, is there any way to prevent the formation of age spots?
From age spots, that's a tricky one. In terms of preventing age spots, I'm going to defer that to a dermatologist, but just making sure you're using adequate, sun protection when you're out in the sun. There are some elements of a diet. So I've heard of things like turmeric paste and other types of creams that might help with this, and this absorbs more anti-inflammatories into the subcutaneous layer. But I don't have enough experience to tell you that those are highly effective ways. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a good solution for age spots. Yes,
hi.
in the room.
For people who are commuting 2 to 3 hours a day, Do you have any advice? Can they do something during the commute time?
Yes, a lot of things you can do. So there's some great anti-aging strategies you can incorporate into your commute. The first one is laughing. So put on podcasts or whatever to keep you joyous. Because I found that the more I was listening to like NPR and news stuff, I was just coming into work in a very dismal mood because there's hardly any good news out there. So listening to comedy stuff is great. I listen to music. I think on one of my prior stress talks, I mentioned that I will often be singing in the car. Like I'll put songs on and I sing. And the reason for that is when you laugh and sing, you're activating your diaphragm. It brings your heart rate and blood pressure down. And then, you know, just whatever. I mean, I think those are key things. And I actually do a lot of slow breathing in the car as well, too. So one of my YouTube videos shows how I use my Apple Watch. And during my commute, I actually bring my heart rate down by 10 or 15 points during my drive just through slow breathing. So when you enter work or you come back home in that calm-centered state, it's fantastic. So I think we treat commutes as being intrinsically stressful, but there's a lot of things that we can do. It is a one time that you're kind of, you don't have the kids bugging you, you know, you don't have anybody else bugging you. It's a good isolated time. So if you reframe it into being a very calm, positive, meditation, joyous chamber, I think you can do some good things. I wish I could prescribe some physical exercises, but until we have those automated cars ready to go, you know, I think it'll be tough. So.
From online, with people getting older, is there any medical dietary concerns with the low-carb keto diets?
So I think the main concern, like we talked about, is making sure that they're getting adequate protein. So that's the key part. So a lot of people doing low-carb keto, they're also diminishing their protein intake quite a bit because they're afraid the protein's going to get converted to sugar. And that's like a big internet myth that's out there. That's very difficult for your body to metabolically convert protein into sugar. So the protein guidelines that I put up there, I'd make sure I'm getting enough of that. The other thing for any age person doing the keto diet is many times people are not getting adequate fiber and plant-based sources. And the one thing is when you look at populations, tribes, ethnicities that age the best in terms of brain health, they're eating multiple servings of fibrous vegetables. And I saw a study that showed that the people that have the most optimal gut digestive microbiome flora, in a typical week, they're eating about, on average, 25 to 30 different plants coming from fruits and vegetables. People on keto diets aren't doing that. People on most diets are not doing that. But sometimes I think our paranoia about carbs and sugar prevents us from eating a lot of very nutritious foods. So that'd be the main thing, is diverse plants, dietary fiber, which is huge and really important, and adequate protein. So those are the things. So that's why I think keto, so one big high-level point about keto, I've done keto. I therapeutically do keto once in a while. I'm not convinced it's a chronic year-round strategy that's healthy. So if I do keto maybe a month after going on a cruise or a vacation, maybe I'll do that to purify and clean the system out and regulate things. But then I want to go back to a diet where I'm getting an adequate array of different plants, vegetables, and all of that. But chronic keto, I'm not purely convinced that that's an optimal diet, for the long run and for longevity. Maybe I will take one more in the room. I got to run to clinic to prevent some aging. All right.
My question is more about when you travel, when you're not able to do your regular routine in terms of consuming the right amount of fiber or plant-based fiber, or doing exercise and things like that. Is it still sort of better than nothing, or is it okay to actually pack a lot of that into your morning and then deal with whatever travel gives you, right? And then again, try to come back to whatever you can in the evening.
You're saying try to pack in the good nutrients and then try to. So first of all, I would say that when you travel, you do the best. I mean, the fact that you're getting away from your crazy, chaotic life and you're vacationing somewhere. Luckily, we try to pick destinations where there's going to be some physical activity. Like go to Europe, you're walking, you're outdoors, sunshine, whatever. I wouldn't be so structured and programmatic about, okay, I've got to stay within this window, because your body just needs a release sometimes. I have enough structure in my life on a daily basis, so when I vacation, I'll pay attention to some things, but usually I just want to enjoy myself. Most cases, I end up skipping breakfast when I go out. I want to sleep in and rest. And my first meal, it naturally ends up being a longer eating window. Or if we had a late night meal, as much as I said anti-late night meals, that's going to happen sometimes on vacation. You're going to go out for an Italian dinner. Then I intuitively know that, you know what, I went crazy yesterday. I finished eating at 9 p.m. I'm probably not going to wake up and go to the breakfast buffet. I'm probably going to skip breakfast, go for a hike, a light jog, and maybe my first meal will be lunch. So I adhere to the principles at a very loose level, but I wouldn't be too structured. You know, just allow yourself to relax, enjoy the foods, and try out different varieties, which is good for health overall, and sort of go from there.
I mean, great tips for vacation, but my question was for business travel. Sorry.
Business, right? So business tactics and techniques, that's where I would think about it. So if you know you have a business evening dinner, the first thing I tell my execs and people that are traveling business is, can you structure an earlier time? And lie and say that, you know what, I've got a business call at 9 p.m. Can we just get together at 6? I need to get this done. So if you can do that, that'd be fantastic. And then in the mornings, like I said, if it does end up being a late night meal, then you just extend your time restricted eating to a different window. So you can do a lot of hacks and strategies to help you from that standpoint. So yeah,
okay,
for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you so much for
Thank
this.
you for all the great questions.
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.